Hi, I'm LadyJenevia. Who's ready to get into the mess? First things first, I'm going to be sharing what the do not reveal spoiler was on the list given to journalists. For episode 5, journalists were not supposed to reveal the following plot development. Austin shares he is divorcing Sue and taking full custody of their baby. That was definitely one of the big moments of this episode. We're going to get into all of that, of course. But first, I figured we would go through some of the shorter character things. Lavinia had a whole lot of nothing to do in this episode. You think giving her one line of stating the obvious warrants anything for me to discuss? No. Let's move on to the Dickinson parents. That whole thing of going to a fundraising auction and then buying back the thing that you donated to that auction, it was really just a poor man's Addams Family. Gomez and Morticia did, in fact, outsell.
25. Cara mia.
25.
30.
35.
Again, I have to air out my issues with the emotional conflict they have presented in relation to war. Specifically, Mr. Dickinson is being hassled by the local town residents because they think that he is being too sympathetic to the other side of this conflict. Mr. Dickinson is mostly acting from a place of thinking about his brother. On an individual level, I get that this has been set up so that the audience is supposed to feel sympathetic for the Dickinsons. They are the main characters on the show, and they've also made a point of never turning the Dickinsons into raging fascists who want to stop the abolition movement. However, I still cannot fully connect to what the show is trying to do with this part of the story. If this was a situation with a different war, namely a war that took place outside of the US, in which the US was invading and waging war, which is usually how these things go, this concept they're going for would have worked considerably better for me as a viewer. There is a lot of propaganda. We're talking millions and millions of dollars spent by the government in order to try to brainwash people in the US and other Western allied countries to not feel empathy for foreign countries. In this situation, it's a weird fit to put so much focus on trying to get people to feel empathy for the other side of a conflict when the other side of that conflict wanted to secede because they wanted to keep their slaves. The show does not elaborate enough on Mr. Dickinson's brother, whether or not he supports the abolition movement, if he's friends with plantation owners. I am not going to spare a single drop of sympathy for this random unseen man until you elaborate on who it is that I'm supposed to be dealing with as a viewer. I understand that allegory is a thing, and oftentimes you can use allegory and subtext to spread these sort of make love, not war messages. But the execution of this part of your war story, C-, and that's me being generous. What is the point that you're trying to make? That people are too binary in their thinking to us versus them? That's fine. Speak on it. Just don't do it in the context of trying to make me sympathize with some random man I've never seen that may or may not be a supporter of slavery. You have got the wrong one. Maybe you thought I would not question this point in the story, porque tú eres demasiado blanco, but you thought wrong. Moving on here, let's have a brief palette cleanser of the miscellaneous side character references at that marketplace, because that was actually a scene I had a lot of fun with, and the way they had so many different things going on in such a short amount of time. First point, let's briefly talk about Harriet Tubman. I'm assuming you know who she is, but if not, she was born into slavery before eventually escaping, after which she began to help more slaves escape using the Underground Railroad. There have been stories that quilts were used as a way of sending secret messages to help with those efforts. I didn't do as deep of a dive on this because I have other things going on, so I was a little bit mixed on where exactly this falls on the spectrum of historical fact and urban legend, but either way, that's what was being referenced. Another little tidbit being referenced in this scene is Annie with her quilt about women needing to secure the right to vote. And you know what? She was giving me some major suffragette vibes. More specifically, the racist ones who weaponized racism against black people as a way of trying to further their own efforts to secure the right to vote for white women, and white women only. See, Annie already left a bad taste in my mouth with that comment. in one of the previous episodes of the season about how there should also be women soldiers, because it reeked of the alarming tendency of the military-industrial complex to girl-bossify war crimes and fascist organizations. Just look at the marketing for Jessica Chastain's new movie, The 355, in which she plays a CIA agent, or Emily Blunt being hired to play a union-busting Pinkerton. Annie is referencing this effort to try to get women the right to vote. But we still have people today in 2021 trying to act like the anniversary of the 19th Amendment should be a cause for celebration, with absolutely no regard for how incredibly bigoted the suffragette movement was at a time when there were so many horrific acts of violence being committed against the Black community. Anyway, I know what the show is trying to do here for Annie as a character and why, but as a Japanese anti-imperialist, it's going to be another C- from me. But it's okay, we can now move on to a funny moment in this quilt scene, when those customers were saying that they didn't understand the less conventional artistic styles of the quilts they were looking at, but then Toshiaki complimented it and they immediately did a 180 with their opinions. It was symbolic of the way some consumers can be, but maybe not just broad consumers, but the ones that really care about being seen as hip to the trends. If I had to give a more notable example relevant to today's world, the most obvious one would of course be Rotten Tomatoes. People put far too much stock in anything and everything to do with that website, despite the fact that it's an extremely flawed system. The very notion of reducing feedback and analysis of art to a percentage is asinine to me. It doesn't take into account who is putting these reviews together, how they're forming their opinions. Really, any and all nuance is removed from the process. If you want to listen to reviews of people with some sort of a platform, that's fine, but listen to the specifics of what they're saying and see if what matters to them as viewers aligns with what you look for in art. I could go far more in depth on that topic, but we know I'm already too long-winded and tangential, so let's move on to one of my favorite parts of season 3, Henry. I love that we get to spend time with this ensemble and that we are able to appreciate the uniqueness of each character. They are diverse in their interests and aspirations, which I am so glad that they included. There's such a limited amount of time in these episodes, so it's really nice to see that there is an attempt being made to individually showcase each of these characters and the performers that play them. Also, the repeated references to Michael Jordan, those were fun. That line from the scene where they say it's in process, I love how precisely it nails the way their struggles with bureaucracy are exposing the way that bureaucracy is often used as a means of upholding systemic racism or other types of bigotry and oppression. But in this particular situation, of course, we are addressing anti-Blackness. But of course, my favorite part of this scene is when Henry says, in order to get to the future, you need to understand the past. That means reading history, studying all the darkness, the pain, the paradox. I didn't really care for the use of the word paradox. It's certainly not the word I would have used, but the general sentiment of this little speech he gives is something that I very much vibe with. I have seen how much history is warped by oppressors who obtain political power. It took me a shockingly long amount of time in my life to learn about the Japanese internment camps during World War II. I am not Japanese American. I don't have family history in America. So no one was relaying those types of stories to me from a first-hand perspective. And it certainly wasn't effectively addressed in formal education systems that I made my way through. I know for a fact the US school system severely neglects discussing the countless countries the US military has unjustly waged war against and progressive leaders that it has couped. But I don't want anyone thinking that this is just a US thing, because that's absolutely not the case. It's a politician thing. Conservative politicians in Japan push for revisionist history to be taught in Japanese schools, which, if those types of policies are passed, it poses a dangerous precedent for fostering unchecked nationalism in the worst possible way. And if you think this is a conservative versus liberal thing, that's also not true. Liberal politicians don't care about education either. That's why Dixiecrats like Joe Biden lie on their campaign trails saying they'll cancel student debt, and then they don't do it once they get into office. they're too busy making weapons deals with Sebastián Piñera's government. You know, Sebastián Piñera, the billionaire oligarch currently dealing with impeachment charges because he was named in the Pandora Papers. We need to all remember to not just learn your own history, you have to also learn history from all over the world. And this scene in Dickinson and the speech Henry gives is touching on these destructive cyclical patterns that keep the most evil people in power because everyone else is too disenfranchised and unaware because of that lack of education. So they're blaming each other for problems instead of blaming the ones who are at the top of the power system who cause the vast majority of the world's woes. Systemic racism, climate change, the military-industrial complex, the all-consuming greed of capitalists. It's all connected. I don't just go on these political tangents, by the way, because Dickinson is talking about war, or because I'm long-winded. I do it because the world is on fire, and the war machine is doing irreparable damage to people all over the world, especially in the global south, and it's unacceptable. Mentioning it in passing in a review of a TV show is the bare minimum as far as I'm concerned. Let's jump now into Emily and Sue's first major scene of this episode, which is, of course, the long declaration of love. I am assuming that the entire fandom got to this part of the episode and turned into that one SpongeBob episode where you look inside SpongeBob's brain and there's a bunch of SpongeBobs running around screaming. That was very much the energy that I envisioned of what would happen when this aired. What you have to remember about this giant declaration of love, though, is that this is directly following Emily's club scene in episode 4. You had Emily dancing at a gay club in her mind, and she wasn't just doing that for the vibes, though we do love the vibes. That was her way of processing her feelings for Sue to a different degree, so that there would be this build-up to her actually saying, "I love you" to Sue out loud. Not only that, it was this giant declaration that just kept going and going. First, we had Uncle Emily. Now we have, "You might be his wife, but I'm yours." The declaration was so long that it seems like the type of thing you would either handwrite or have someone else do it that's good at calligraphy or graphic design. And you write it out on some very nice aesthetic paper, you frame it, you put that thing up on the wall like a motivational poster to remind yourself that if you're with someone and they're not doing all of that, if they're not giving you that energy, maybe they're not the one. Let's get into that first scene now with Sue and Austin. If you're an Austin anti, you are entitled to have that opinion. But from a writing perspective, I really like this scene. It's fantastic for it to have built off of that previous conflict that they had in episode 4. I can understand where they're both coming from, but I have to highlight again how much I really felt for Austin as a character. It's partially from the writing, but also because of the performance. The last time Sue and Austin had conflict, he was wanting to spend time with the baby, and Sue was discouraging it and being dismissive of it. Now, once again, Austin wants to spend time looking after the baby, his baby. Imagine that, a father actually wants to spend time with his child, being emotionally present. Do you know how many people I knew growing up that either did not have a father that was around or just straight up despised their father? It was a lot of people, probably borderlining on an alarming amount, if I'm being honest. If I call this a revolutionary concept, it's not just me being facetious. I know a lot of you love Sue, and that's fine, but you have to admit she was dead wrong for saying fathers are just not good nurturers, men have other roles to play. The whole point of Sue delivering this line, though, and for her to be pushing him to go to fight in the war, is that it's calling out toxic masculinity. When people call out toxic masculinity and some men who don't like that being a thing that is called out, and they don't like feminism or whatever it is that they think feminism is, this is a perfect example of how the point of calling out toxic masculinity is that it's not just something that's destructive to women. Toxic masculinity can also play a large role in discouraging men from having the type of emotional sensitivity and presence that they should have in order to be good fathers and good people in general, I would argue. If you have a couple who have a child or children, and if one parent is a man and the other is a woman, it should not be the sole responsibility of the mother to nurture and raise the child. The burden of emotional labor should not fall solely on the mother. Two parents are present, so both parents should be present. I don't want to say that toxic masculinity is the main driving force behind men going off to fight in wars. You would have to take into account a whole lot of other things, namely imperialism, capitalism, a whole lot of propaganda, and a whole lot of greed. But toxic masculinity can definitely play a larger role in some men not having the tools to deal with their emotions effectively, and in extreme cases, develop a propensity for violence in a general sense. Is this argument between Sue and Austen not the very definition of toxic masculinity? The difference being that this time, it has subverted from the usual ways of addressing that topic by having a man who actually is trying to do the right thing, and it's the woman who is perpetuating ignorance. I appreciate that they've done it this way because it's a more refreshing way of addressing this issue. It also means that the things that happen later in the episode don't end up feeling overly abrupt as a plot development. There's clearly been a build-up to what Austen does at the end of the episode. However, before we get into all of that, let's take a moment to enjoy the merriment of the Dickinson family sing-along. Did I, or did I not say in my season 3 review that there might be some singing? We got the singing. You got a little bit of everyone except for Lavinia, of course. She brought some dancing, but let's be real, it was no Lola Montez scene. Hopefully everyone is feeling good about whatever singing they were hoping to see take place whenever it was going to happen. I think I saw on one of the Dickinson fan pages that Adrian had already been hinting about how he would be singing on the show. I know for me, one of the real highlights was Austen showing up and surprising everyone, and we got this moment of a Dickinson sibling duet between him and Emily. That was the love fest I've been missing. There's also another way of describing this moment, though. The calm before the storm. Which means it's time to get into the mess. They set this moment up like Austen's about to give a toast, but then he says, not exactly a toast, and both times I watched this episode, I screamed. Not a scream that wakes your neighbors up, but more of a Mike's Mike scream. If you've watched Mike's Mike videos, then you know what I'm talking about, hopefully. When Austen said that, I knew we were about to have some drama. I also knew that when Mrs. Dickinson left the room to go try on her wedding dress, that whenever she came back, she would be returning to find a mess. The way that dynamic was set up, it was the obvious writing choice. It was a good way to set up a fun comedic moment. I know that I said that when I first started watching season 3, I didn't understand why Austen was the way that he was. I felt like he underwent this jarring time jump where we should have been given an explanation of how he got from point A to point B, but now we are halfway through the season, so by this point, I've acclimated to the fact that this is just where he's at now. With everything they've presented, the loss of Jane, the conflicts with his father, the conflicts with Sue, and the lack of permission to emotionally bond with his child, this makes perfect sense. They've clearly laid out the list of reasons for why Austen is popping off at the family karaoke night, and you know what? I'm here for it. I was here to watch the mess. Everyone keeps putting Austen down. You see it happen again at this family get-together. There's just these snide little comments, very little regard for Austen's feelings. Now, I'm not saying he should be handled with kid gloves, but you have to think about how he's experiencing an accumulation of this type of treatment, which is why he's now hit his breaking point and he's lashing out the way that he is. He says, I don't like the way my life has turned out. Then he announces he's leaving Dickinson and Son. He's going to start his own law firm with a specialty in divorce. He wants to divorce Sue and take full custody of the child. First of all, big fan of divorce. If you cannot make it work with your partner, divorce! Especially if you have children. You want to subject your child to years and years of prolonged trauma, exposing their developing mind to excessive levels of the stress hormone cortisol, because you don't want to get a divorce. There's no justifiable excuse for it. Jail. As for the custody part of his announcement, I'm not saying that he's right to deprive Sue of access to their child, but I also do understand where he's coming from. He's desperate. The show has made this abundantly clear. All you have to do is let him be with his child. You don't even realize how good of a position you're in? That you have a husband who wants to do his fair share of labor, physical and emotional, in raising this child? This difference that these two have is not irreconcilable. As far as I'm concerned, you only need to do two things to make this marriage successful. Make it an open marriage and let Austen spend time with his child. But if you thought Austen was done bringing the drama, oh no, we haven't even gotten to the biggest moment of his. When he says to his father, "Hit me like you used to hit her." My jaw dropped. I'm not even exaggerating. That's exactly what happened when I first binged the season 3 press screeners. I wrote it down in my notes. I could not believe that he was airing that out in front of everyone. He even said that everyone knew, but they just pretended not to. Now again, I know some people are Austen antis, and it's okay if you feel that way, but you have to remember that whatever reasons you have for disliking him, you know what Austen has never done? He has never hit Emily and he has never hit Sue. I'm just saying, if you're going to come for men on this show when you think they're being toxic, I'm pretty sure that physical abuse kind of puts you up at the top of the list. Another thing I want to address about Austen's story this season is that they keep bringing up the drinking. However, when it comes to that storyline, I'm getting a whole lot of telling with not enough showing. I don't really believe that it's as serious as everyone else is making it out to be. Nothing they've shown thus far is enough for me to feel like we're dealing with something significant, extreme alcoholism. At most, I think what we're dealing with is someone that is too frequently turning to alcohol as an unhealthy coping mechanism. That doesn't mean that he's developed a biochemical addiction to alcohol, which makes it all the more important that you try to help this person, emotionally support them, so that it does not escalate into anything worse. Also, the idea of poking at someone for their drinking problem, it just doesn't seem like an effective way of helping that person or just helping the situation in general. I feel like I should elaborate a bit more on why I'm harping on this as much as I am. It's not as much about Austen as a fictional character in this fictional universe of a TV show, but this attitude towards people who use substances irresponsibly, because I feel that it poses a problem in real life outside of the show. Politicians have this nasty tendency to criminalize things like substance abuse, addiction, and the people who suffer from addiction, especially in a place like the US. And they do this solely so that they can fill their for-profit prisons and further abuse people and exploit them for cheap labor. However, if you look at a place like Portugal, they used to have a huge problem with drugs. And what they ended up doing was decriminalizing drugs and redirecting funds into resources that would help people who were suffering from addiction. And the difference was night and day. So I want to make it clear that I'm not an Austen Dickinson stan. I'm just a very opinionated person about a lot of socio-political issues. I don't know if the people working on this show were trying to play up the angle that Austen is more of a mean drunk or a raging alcoholic than what they're actually presenting in the episodes, but I just really want to make sure that I challenge this material when reviewing the show, so that if any of you are watching this review, perhaps me bringing this up will cause you to rethink the attitudes that the larger culture around you has about things like substance abuse and addiction. Okay, tangent over. Back to Emily now. For her to side with her father, I get it, he almost died recently, but also, I still don't care. I think it's a weird choice. It's certainly not the choice I would have made. You'll all just have to wait and see how things continue to play out in the remaining episodes, but that's just my opinion, okay? I don't like it. That leaves the final point of discussion, which is the disagreement between Emily and Sue in the final portion of this episode. It starts during karaoke night. Sue makes a comment about Emily's poem not needing the second stanza. Remind me again how many poems you've written, Sue? Listen, I'm not saying you're not allowed to have an opinion about art, even if you're not the one making the art. Obviously, hello, I'm reviewing a TV show that I myself did not work on. But this comment on its own is not the issue. It's the whole mess that happens after Austen's blow up. Sue goes up to Emily's room and she starts snooping through her things, which, first of all, why? Obviously, I know I'm projecting here, but if I had someone I liked visiting me, and they started snooping through my things, any romantic vibes in that room would immediately cease. Sue completely blows up at Emily. Look, I get it, you're stressed. Austen just told you he wants a divorce and he wants custody of the baby. You're clearly in denial about how that is affecting you because obviously that would stress anyone out. I don't care if you don't love him romantically. That development would be stressful. But then Sue is getting mad that Emily is sending her poems off to Colonel Higginson, whom we saw at the beginning of the episode, hyping her up, giving her that validation. We love it. First, nobody, and then George, and now Colonel Higginson. I really don't see what the issue is at all. Why is Sue mad? Why don't you want Emily to thrive? This whole fight was weird for me as a viewer. I definitely want to hear what you, the viewers, think, because I just was not having it with this argument. The way I see it, Emily has every right to send her poems off to get potential professional feedback. It could help her get further opportunities for publication of her work. Why should Sue be mad about any of this? What even is this fight? I've watched this episode more than once, and this fight is weird. At first, I was wondering if maybe she was jealous because she thought Emily was writing to Colonel Higginson in a romantic way, but when the dialogue continues, that wasn't the impression that I got either. She was just insulting Emily for being weak. Why are we now resorting to insults? What exactly did Emily do wrong? Can we just go back to episode 4, please? Can we go back to the gay club that exists in Emily's mind? Everyone gets a cocktail, validation, and all the time they need to dance their cares away. Sue has just had this huge blowout with Austen, but she wants to be all, I don't care about Austen, I care about you. Fine. She's reading Emily's letters to Colonel Higginson, which perhaps somebody else could have misinterpreted as romantic, but Emily's just always been dramatic when she writes to people. That's what got her into trouble with Sam Bowles' wife last season. That's just how Emily talks. So Sue should know that about her. So that's clearly not what the issue is either. So what is it? Are you being jealous? Are you being possessive? You're mad that Emily showed her poem to another person, and just because your partner says that they don't need anything but you and your love doesn't actually mean that they have to give up anything and everything else in life. You can still be Emily's number one, the person whom she loves the most and values the opinions of the most, but that doesn't mean that she cannot have a number 2, 3, and 4 of people who get to interact with her art. I'm honestly getting whiplash here because Sue went through that whole thing of trying to tell Emily that she cannot be the only one who reads her poems anymore. That was what jump-started season 2, right? Since when do artists have to make art and not let anyone else see them except for their romantic partner? Now, maybe there's something I've missed here. I definitely want to open things up for viewers to show their interpretations of how this scene played out, of how it fits into the episode, the entire season, or the entire series for that matter. It was a weird fight. I've said that multiple times. I don't like it. I'm exasperated, which is why it's a perfect time to close things off. Stay tuned because I will be posting my spoiler-free review of episode 6 sometime after this video review goes live. Thank you again for tuning in, and don't forget to like and comment since it really helps me out. See you soon. Bye. Kimiko-chan would like for everyone to know that there is no reason to start fights with the people you love just because you're going through some stuff in your life, okay? There are healthier ways to deal with your feelings. Yeah, you could run. Hi, hello. You could go for a run. You could dance it out. You could take a nap.